back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Angelica Spanos. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are following several big trials today, and we are also standing by for the sentencing of James Scandirito. That is happening in Florida, and it's expected to start at 3 o'clock this afternoon. He could face 15 years in prison. A jury has already found Scandirito not guilty of the murder of his father, but guilty of abuse of a dead human body for dismembering him and disposing the remains at a golf club. We will bring you that live when we have that here on the Law and Crime Network. Also, the jury in Charles Merritt trial is done for the day with their deliberations. They had just 2 hours today because of an appointment. His sentencing started this morning at 8:36. That's Pacific time. So that we did just find out that they are done for the day. This, of course, is after Merritt was found guilty on 4 counts of murder for killing the McStay family. The jury will now decide if Merritt will spend his life in prison without parole or if he will face death by lethal injection. Yesterday, the jury deliberated for 2 hours. Meantime, there is a verdict, and we want to talk about this in depth right now in the Christopher Versado trial. This is after a jury found him guilty of a triple murder on Super Bowl Sunday that happened back in 2017. Jurors deliberated for 2 hours yesterday and concluded that Vasata was one of the 2 masked gunmen who barged into a backyard party and killed 3 young adults. Joining me to break this all down and talk about all of these trials with me is Roger P. Foley, a criminal defense attorney. Roger, hey there.
Hi, Angelica. How are you today?
Great. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get into this because we want to talk about Vasata and we want to get to some of those closing arguments. But first off, first reaction, what do you think about this guilty verdict?
Well, it seems appropriate. I mean, they found gloves, DNA, firearms, parked the car a mile away. There seems so much. What scares me is I actually live in the town of Jupiter, and if it wasn't for Law and Crime, I wouldn't even have any idea that this happened.
Wow.
It's kept on the down low.
That's crazy. I did not know that coming into this interview. So now we have an expert here that's also in the area. Thank you for that. We want to take you back and play some of the recaps of those closing arguments. So let's listen to that now. All right, so as the prosecution's closing arguments, you were listening to Jill Richmond there. Richstone, rather. One of the things that she did there was she was describing the scene. She talked a lot about what the scene looked like, and then she talked about the wicked actions that took place, how the victims were ambushed, how they were helpless. When you're thinking and hearing that, what's your initial reaction, Roger, when you hear the prosecution here? Do you think she was effective?
I think she was very effective. She set a scene. She allowed jurors to picture what happened in their mind. There's a group of people in their 20s sitting around a fire on Super Bowl Sunday, and here comes 2 guys in dark clothing with masks, and they open fire. And they kill these 2 innocent girls that have nothing to do with the drug trade, right? That have nothing to do with drugs, wrong place, wrong time. But she sets a stage that jurors can understand and can follow, and someone's guilty, and they found this gentleman guilty.
Right. All right. Well, she continues to go on more about this, so let's listen to what else she followed this with. All right, so that was the guilty verdict being read there for 26-year-old Christopher Versado. He was found guilty of murdering those 3 victims at that Super Bowl party. Roger Foley with us, joining us today. Let's talk about this. Let's get into this. Were you surprised with the verdict here? And what did you think of the prosecution during those closing arguments?
I think that the verdict was expected as you watched the trial unfold and you looked at the evidence. There seemed to be a clear understanding that Vasata was involved. He was found with a firearm. The other individual, Sean, was involved with him. There was a drug trade going on. They really explained it well. The prosecution did a very good job of laying out the story for the jury. And quite frankly, before I went to verdict, I was expecting a guilty verdict.
Yeah, and he is facing the death penalty here. This is obviously now in the sentencing phase. What do you think? Do you think, if you had to guess, how this is going to play out?
there's no way to know that the jury will make its recommendation to Judge Marks, and he'll make the final decision. But the jury, they're tasked right now with making a decision whether it's life in prison or whether they recommend the death penalty, and ultimately Judge Marks will make the determination.
And the penalty phase is coming on Wednesday of next week, so we will obviously be watching this very closely. One of the things about this whole story is that there are a lot of moving parts. There are scenes here, multiple scenes described throughout this trial. So it was kind of complicated to understand the flow of this, the storytelling of this. Did that play into the outcome and how the jury made their decision?
Angelica, I don't know the answer to that. I think that sometimes juries are not given enough credit for following the storyline or the theme of a case. In this case, it seemed evident. Now, obviously, Vasata is saying that he's been set up, right? There's phone calls to his girlfriend, like they set me up, someone set me up. Is there an argument for that? Well, I guess there was an argument for that, but the defense didn't convince the jury. So if the jury's not convinced, they came back with a guilty verdict. And now, looking at the mitigating factors, you heard the court clerk read out, that was he in possession of a firearm? Did he discharge a firearm? Was the discharge of the firearm causing the death of each individual, the three individuals? I don't know if they know which bullets hit which person, but again, there's that principal theory. I mean, he's been found guilty of first-degree murder.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. When we come back after the break, we're going to get into what the defense said in their closing arguments and break that all down. So stay with us here on the Law&Crime Network. All right. So that was Elizabeth Ramsey doing the defense's closing arguments there. It's important to note she's also going to appear likely later today in the Scandirito trial because she represented him in the guilty phase. Of course, that's also down in Florida. So I want to bring in my guest now, Roger P. Foley. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Listening to her closing arguments, and of course, this is the defense. So what do you think of her strategy there? How did she do?
Well, she's explaining to the jury what needs to be done. Could she explore it a little bit more? Yes, but this is a common technique that's used for the defense. Listen, the person's there, right? There's DNA. They had a hoodie. Yes, there is evidence of guilt, but you need guilt beyond and to the exclusion of any reasonable doubt, right? So if you have a test tube full of liquid and there's just a drop more that you could put in, that's that drop of reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt does not, beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt does not mean that there's a bunch of evidence. You could be likely guilty. It could be very likely that you're guilty. But if there's even one drop of doubt, you should not be found guilty. And that's what she was saying. He was there. There was DNA. It was a hoodie. But those don't add up to a conviction.
Right. She was also mentioning kind of the holes in the storyline in the case. She was saying how motive is not essential here. Let's continue to listen because she has some more things that we want to point out to you. All right. So that was the rest of the defense's closing arguments there. One of the things that we obviously know is coming here is that Vasata is facing the death penalty. So yesterday, when we got the guilty verdict down, we knew that this was going to obviously have the penalty phase. So when we're talking about what's to come, Roger, what do you think that we can expect to hear from the defense next week in regards to the death penalty phase that might be different from what we heard in these closing arguments?
Well, the defense is obviously going to be advocating for their client and that life in prison is the better and just result rather than the death penalty. And they're going to bring up various arguments for that. But their job as defense attorneys is to convince the jury to give the lesser or to recommend the lesser of the two penalties. So you're going to hear a lot about that.
And when we're talking about a death penalty case with a crime like this, it's a little bit different to wrap your mind around because it's not necessarily, oh, I killed my mother. It's not it's not that type of crime. There's a lot of parts here. There's a past here with these people that might be related to drugs, to weapons, to that type of thing. It's not necessarily what you would say, oh, this is a clear death penalty-esque type of thing, if that's even something to say. But you know what I'm trying to say? What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, she's going to talk about what she just talked about. Like, hey, these people were comrades. They were partners in crime, right? They were all into drug dealing. They hung out together. They talked to each other, and they still were able to eat at the same table. This wasn't, mob boss on one side of the town versus mob boss, or gang on one side versus gang on. These guys knew each other. And again, how is she going to present it? I'm not sure how she's going to present it. But obviously, she's going to talk about these guys were in each other's phone book. They, in their phone list, they talked to one another on a weekly basis. They hung out together. There was really no reason. But again, she's got to be careful because she can't insult the jury, because the jury's already made a determination that they think he's guilty. So she's got to be very careful, which is a little bit different than what they're doing in the McStay, in the McStay case. So, or the Charles Merritt case that we'll be talking about. She's got to be careful not to insult the jury. They've made a decision. Now she has to sort of tilt her strategy just a little bit to not insult them. She doesn't want to insult the prosecution. She doesn't want to insult the case. She's going to just say, hey, these guys were friends. They were buddies. They were partners. I know you found that he's guilty, but he doesn't deserve death. And how she's going to do that, I'm not sure, but I'm real interested, and my eyes are going to be glued just like our viewers. Yeah, we will be definitely watching that very intently. We have to take a break here on the Law and Crime Network, but stay with us because when we come back, we have plenty more to talk about, and stay with us here.